On this installment of Resilience Toolbox, we're speaking with Rick Binder, CEO of Phase International, spotlighting how to avoid the most common source of injury as an emergency care provider. So Rick, I know you're passionate about this topic. How did you become so passionate about it, and what do we need to know?
My passion for this topic in particular really started about 10 years ago, a little over, when my father, passed the metaphorical torch down to me after he invented the Binder lift for my mother, who was an emergency care provider. And he made the Binder lift to help her avoid injury from lifting patients while performing her job duties. And so in the last decade of helping my father bring the Binder lift to market, I also started to notice all of these other areas in patient handling that needed improvement. We're still moving patients in a very old-fashioned way. And so if we always do what we've always done, we're going to continue to get what we've always got. And historically speaking, according to CDC, year over year without contest, the most common source of injury to emergency care providers is from patient movement, lifting and moving patients. So we have a lot of room as an industry to improve there. And so that's what my focus has been on for the last decade.
So Rick, with your holistic approach, what are the top 3 mistakes you see providers make during patient handling that leads to chronic pain and injury?
After the last decade of pouring all of my available time and resources into this topic, I started to notice trends. And in these trends, I noticed these top 3 mistakes. And the first one is using emergent moves in non-urgent situations. And so to recap what the categories of patient movement is real quick. So we have emergent moves. This is when the environment's becoming dangerous for either the patient or us, or the patient's condition is deteriorating so rapidly, like seconds truly count, and we're grabbing ankles, we're doing whatever we can to get the patient out. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be using this move too often, but the problem is we are. So that's where it's much more dangerous for us and our patient, because then there's urgent moves. That's the next category. The difference between urgent and emergent is in urgent moves, it's still an emergency. We're still moving quickly. We're still moving with purpose, but we're taking time to use a piece of equipment. The next category of patient movement is the non-urgent movements. And that's where we're waiting for extra resources, and we're definitely using a piece of equipment, making it as safe for us and the patient as possible. But too often, I hear of providers going in, and we have the example of a 350-pound patient stuck in a bathtub. Mm-hmm. We're going in there, the patient's stable, they just need help back up. But when we're not using a piece of equipment to get that patient up, then we're doing so in a way it's much more stressful and adds a lot of compressive and shear forces on our musculoskeletal system. So using emergent moves in non-urgent situations is mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 is routinely lifting and carrying outside of our power zone. The way I remember it is your knees to your neck. Really, it's about 12 inches above from the ground, but from your knees to your neck and 12 inches in front of your body. If we can keep our hands in this zone, this power zone, we're going to do really good. This is the most safest area that we can bear weight. As soon as we start reaching out of this area, we're causing severe compressive and shear forces on our musculoskeletal system that we may not see or even feel at the time, but it adds up to chronic pain and injury. And one of the places we do this most often is with a rigid device. So anytime we're picking up a patient, let's say on a backboard, and we're bringing our hands all the way down to the ground, that's well outside of our power zone, right? We need to raise that lift point up to about our knees. And there's really 2 easy ways that you can do this. One is there's really inexpensive handle extenders we can attach to a rigid device that will raise the lift point, that will attach to universally any rigid device. You can also put your soft stretcher underneath your rigid device. So if you put your backboard on top of your soft stretcher and then you carry by your soft stretcher handles, that's going to raise your lift point. And so that's how we can avoid that mistake. The next mistake is mistake number 3, and that's lifting and carrying bariatric patients when we don't actually really need to. We're showing up on scene and we have these bariatric patients that they deserve quality and prompt care, but we're showing up and a lot of times providers aren't equipped and trained to do that. And so we're manually lifting these patients when there's mechanical lifts like the Mangar Elk. It's widely used in the UK and Australia and Canada. We're helping bring it to the market here in the US. It's a long ways to go, but it's an airbag that inflates. It actually lifts these patients so we don't have to. And that, of course, anytime we can engineer out the solution, just like what we've done with power cots and power loads and things like that, especially for these bariatric patients. And then for carrying these bariatric patients, we can avoid that by sliding them, getting these extrication devices that we can slide patients out of their residence. And we can even put a backboard and attach a backboard to the foot of the stretcher with some simple straps. And we can slide that bariatric patient up the backboard like a ramp and onto the stretcher. So then we got a patient, let's say from the bathtub all the way out onto the stretcher without ever manually lifting or carrying that patient. And so if we just made those 3 changes and we avoided those mistakes, I guarantee you we would see injuries fall and would no longer be the most common cause of injury.
So Rick, thanks for covering that piece. Now, what can fire and EMS personnel do to avoid the mistakes you were talking about?
The first thing that they can do is go back to their ambulance and take inventory of the equipment that they have available to them. Every emergency care provider deserves to have equipment that is proven to help them perform their job duties safely and without putting themselves at unnecessary harm and risk. So there's 5 categories of equipment. There's lifting and assisting devices, there's carrying devices, there's extrication equipment, so it's like your stair chairs, things like that, your stretchers, and your transferring equipment. Provider has to have a piece of equipment in all of those categories, otherwise they're going to be making these mistakes of using emergent moves in non-urgent situations, or reaching and operating out of the power zone, or unnecessarily lifting patients. You can also go to our website, phaseintl.com, and most of these pieces of equipment we offer free field trials on to allow providers, once they know what categories of equipment they're missing, they can then trial it and see if it's a good fit for them and their patients. And another thing they can do is train. We offer a free 1.5-hour continuing education certified training program on patient handling. And so it'll take a much deeper dive than what we've done today on how to avoid these mistakes and what is causing the chronic pain and injury that's plaguing our industry, and how we can change our behavior and get better outcomes in the future.
It really is another set of tools for the toolbox that are critical. And I want to thank you, Rick, for joining us today on Resilience Toolbox and sharing this important information. We wish you continued success as well.
Thanks, David.